Whether it's someone working on the ranch, working on a farm, or whether it's somebody rodeoing for a living, there's lots of reasons that a cowboy or a bull rider needs to be strong. But if we see ourselves as Christians first, there are some really big reasons why we need to understand biblical strength. And Paul brings us one of the biggest in Ephesians 6, verses 10 through 17. What Paul is talking about in Ephesians is spiritual warfare and the need to be strong to fight that. Ephesians 6, 10 to 12 says this: Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the power of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. In church terms, we understand that Paul is talking about spiritual warfare, but it's something that in our culture we tend not to talk a lot about, which is the devil, Satan. It seems to be something that we leave for horror movies and stories and legends, where we allow ourselves to believe in God and we allow ourselves to have a saving faith in Jesus Christ. We struggle to acknowledge the fact that the devil is a presence here on earth. Paul is making it clear that there is a battle going on and that there are things that we need to do to understand that and to fight it. It isn't just the idea of a devil on our shoulder whispering and tempting us to sin. There is a real spiritual battle that goes on within us as we fight against sin, as we work to become more Christ-like through our salvation and the desire to be more like Jesus, but yet we still struggle with our sin side. There is a real battle going on there. All the negative thoughts that can creep into our heads, all of the times that we can feel beat down by family, by personal situations, by a losing streak at a rodeo, we can begin to hold ourselves back from everything that God would want us to become, from ever becoming more like Jesus. That doesn't come from God. That's part of spiritual warfare. When we have a saving faith in Jesus Christ, God then sees us as righteous, which means he no longer holds our sin against us. Yes, he's aware of the sins that we still have, but he now sees us as perfect. In regards to how God sees us, Paul tells us this in 2 Corinthians 5:21. For he who made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. God allowed Jesus to become what he hated the most, sin, so you could become what he loved the most, his righteous son. Jesus died as you, so you could live as him. God isn't going to cause us to sin. God isn't going to lead us into temptation, but the devil and the evil forces around us will. And so what we need to understand then is the reason we deal with that is the consequences of sin. It's the consequences of Adam and Eve having that opportunity to choose whether to sin or not. And they brought that evil into this world. So we deal with the consequences of that. And bad things happen, and we face temptations, we face struggles. But in 1 Corinthians 10:13, Paul again reminds us that God has taken care of us. It says this: No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. But one more part of spiritual warfare that we have to endure then is the world around us. Our culture tells us that we're wrong for what we believe. It tells us that because we disagree with other people's lifestyles, because we choose to follow a biblical approach to life, that we're evil, that we're in the wrong. Just like the devil, our culture uses lies and misleads people into believing untruths about what Christians really are. Yet, God sent Jesus to die for every single person, regardless of what they believe and what lifestyle they follow. Jesus died for all of us. But those of us with a saving faith in Jesus have instructions to not conform to this culture. And Romans 12:2 tells us that. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. So we know that spiritual warfare can take place within ourselves and within the culture around us. And then comes the part that many of us don't want to talk about, is the existence of demons and the fact that they will mess with our lives and cause us harm if we let them. First Peter says this in chapter 5, verses 8 to 9. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary the devil prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of sufferings are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. So, with these different ways that we're facing spiritual warfare, what is it that we're supposed to do? How do we fight this? Paul tells us that in the rest of Ephesians 6:13-17. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when that day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything to stand, stand firm then, with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to all this, take up the shield of faith with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. Paul is using an illustration that culture would relate to very well in understanding the armor and weapons that Roman guards would use. But what he's showing us then is that we need to be strong and firm, hold our ground with this armor of God. And then we also need to be prepared to go out there and fight for others. It's the souls of others that we care about as well. So not only do we stand our ground and fight the spiritual warfare that's going on within and around us, but we fight for those that also need to come to a saving faith in Jesus Christ.